Fabulous. So thank you very much for joining us. I will just introduce us. I am the person who has been pestering you by email. So I'm Charlotte, and these are my colleagues Lisa and Ellis, and we are organising the CENTA conference, which will be in September. The theme of the conference is post-PhD pathways, and we've noticed the kind of growing despondency of people wanting to stay in academia. So we're kind of looking at alternate pathways that people might not have thought of. So the first person I thought of when we thought of this theme was you. I watched you for so many years on the TV. I was like, Alice Roberts is the person we need to speak to. That's why we're very excited that you've joined us. So that is us. And if you're happy, we can just dive straight in.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. So your career journey, we would like to just have it in your words, how it's progressed from studying medicine, I believe, through to broadcasting now. And you had a period in the middle where I think you worked as an NHS junior doctor. So what then made you go back into academia?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have had quite a convoluted career path, and I don't think I anticipated when I was a teenager that I would end up doing any of the jobs actually that I do now. So that's quite interesting. And then even when I was studying at university, I didn't really see where I would be at this point in my career. So it has taken twists and turns, and I come from a background in medicine. That was my chosen area of study, and that really came from the fact that I was interested in science very generally, biology in particular, human biology most of all, and I wanted to be in a job where I was interacting with people on a daily basis. And medicine ticked all the boxes for me. So I decided I wanted to do medicine. I studied medicine at Cardiff University. I fell in love with anatomy. So I think that particular discipline, which obviously is the kind of human biology element within medicine, really appealed to me. And I did an anatomy degree as part of my medical training as well. And then I became a junior doctor. And I worked as a junior doctor in medicine and surgery, and then I was looking around for the next steps, and there was this very appealing job at Bristol University which involved teaching anatomy to medical students, but also actually still doing a little bit of surgery. So so that seemed like a kind of perfect job for a young aspiring surgeon with a keen interest in anatomy, and obviously learning your anatomy well, which you do when you're teaching anything, would also help me in my surgical career. So there were all these kind of elements to it, and that job was kind of everything I'd hoped for and more. When I started that job, I made contact with a group of researchers who were all involved with looking at archaeological human remains in various ways. So Jonathan Musgrave, who is a forensic and a biological anthropologist, Juliet Rogers, who very sadly is no longer with us, who was an amazing paleopathologist. And it was paleopathology that really appealed to me, because this is study of disease in ancient human remains. And coming from a medical background, that was particularly appealing. So I started to look at archaeological bones as I sort of started to build up a bit of research. And actually what happened as well was that just purely serendipitously, the opportunity came up to stay in that position where I was demonstrating anatomy to medical students. And eventually that turned into a lectureship. And at the time, I thought I was probably stepping out of clinical surgery for maybe a year or two. But actually, I ended up starting a part-time PhD, and I stayed in that department for 11 years. So I was very kind of gently sidetracked into academia. I didn't go after an academic career at all. I was kind of lured into it by my interests. And so I was very late doing a PhD. It took me a long time to do my PhD. It took me nearly 7 years part-time to do it. And I think, like most people doing PhDs, I got to those sticky points in the middle years where you suddenly think, first of all, why am I doing a PhD? And secondly, why am I doing this subject? And I nearly changed topic completely in the middle. But in the end, I took some advice and I stuck to my original project. And I'm very pleased that I'm now the world expert in rotator cuff disease in humans and other apes, which is very niche, as anybody doing a PhD will understand. But of course, it gives you a really, really good grounding as well in scientific process, scientific thinking. And that's the real importance, I think, of PhDs. You think the importance is the one thing that you're researching and your own project. And yes, that is important. And the depth that you can go into in that one particular area is just fantastic. But it's everything you learn while you're doing it about how science works. So it's interesting, because then that prepares you, I think, for obviously a career in academia, and it prepares you for the next steps in terms of being a researcher. But it also prepares you for lots of other roles as well, because it means that you've really understood what science is by the time you've finished your PhD. And then I mean, I've ended up doing lots of other things as well. So that was kind of how I ended up as an academic, I suppose. But because I was, and again, it was just through serendipity, as I was doing that research in human bones, in osteology, I ended up working with the Channel 4 series Time team and writing reports on human bones for them. And then that led to appearances on the series. And then that led to me being a regular contributor on Time Team. And then actually the rest of my television career has really kind of unfurled from there to the point where I'm a very seasoned science presenter now. So it's kind of grasping opportunities as they came along. But I've always felt that I wanted to communicate about my research, about my discipline, to wider audiences, and actually not just through television. I felt very much when I was in the anatomy department at Bristol University that it should be part of my job to be widening access, not just to university study, but just to ideas. And so I would do lots of schools outreach, lots of science festivals, all of that kind of thing. And again, I think maybe it comes from a medical background that it never really occurred to me not to do that. And I'm really excited by what's happening with public engagement in our universities at the moment, because I'm seeing a whole generation of postgrads coming through who just feel that this is part of what it is to be doing research in a university, that you should very naturally be engaging the public with it as well.
I definitely agree. I've seen in my department, I'm an earth scientist specialising in paleontology, and I've seen so many of us now have started doing, including myself, animations and graphical illustrations of our papers, for example, just to make it more engaging for people. And I myself do fossil festivals and things like that, because I find it's exactly the same as you. It's so important, because how do you get the next generation interested if you don't talk to them? So I totally agree with you.
It's great fun, isn't it, Charlotte? Because it's you're doing your research because you're passionate and enthusiastic about it, and it's really lovely to share that passion and enthusiasm, and particularly with younger people, and to show them what your area of science is all about.
Yeah, and show them that science is cool and it doesn't just involve a lab coat.
Yeah.
You covered so much of my questions. I don't think actually we have like loads of little part questions, and you covered everything. I suppose the one thing I would say is, do you feel that you are where you're supposed to be, as in you don't regret leaving your medical career for your academic career, and that you're happy that you made that choice?
Yeah, I don't have any regrets. I mean, I think that it may be in a parallel universe somewhere, if the multiverse is a reality, there's me as a surgeon, and my ambition was to be a pediatric surgeon, and I think I would have been extremely happy in that career. So I think that I'm very lucky to have had a very satisfying and fulfilling career, and I love my job, and I think that's a very precious thing, and I don't take it for granted. A lot of people don't end up in jobs that they love, that they're excited about waking up every morning and going to work. And so I don't take that for granted at all. I know that I'm extremely lucky to be in that position. But I do think that there could have been other paths I could have taken where I would have been as satisfied, as fulfilled. When I was making that transition from medicine into academia slowly, and then kind of looking back and going, oh, I seem to be an academic. I think that for a few years, I did have that idea that I would go back to clinical. And then when I kind of realized that I was on this other path, there were elements that I really missed of clinical practice, and I think the one that I really missed was the pastoral element, and that, you know, just daily looking after people. And for me, during my academic career, actually, pastoral care of students has been very important. So I think that's really come. I like to think it's entirely altruistic, but I think it comes from a deep need within me to feel that I'm still working in that kind of role as well, and that, you know, making sure that, well, thinking about the welfare of others, of students, but also other members of the university.
Yeah, perfect. Lisa, Ellis, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, yeah, Lisa, do you want me to ask mine, Lisa, or
yeah, you can go first if you want. That's
sure.
Fine.
Okay, sure. So, you know, I guess what we're really interested in is just since like your first kind of just TV project, like just what's kept you in broadcasting for all these years, and what's kept you, like, you know, like sort of just hungry to do more projects, you know, in science communication and broadcasting?
That's a great question. I think it's a number of things, actually. I really enjoy making television programs. I like the whole process of it, and the process of it is very collaborative, and I really love that. So it is in some ways like working on a collaborative research project, and bringing ideas together, thinking of how to then communicate those ideas. Is like working collaboratively with other academics, and then coming together to write a paper. You know, it's that same kind of feeling of collaboration and that collegiality. So I love that, but I do love that, you know, what we're making as well, and the ability to use television to open up a subject to a much wider audience. So, you know, I can go and give a talk to a small group of people, or even a larger group of people, but I'm not in an hour's talk, in an hour's live talk, going to meet anywhere near the same number of people or have the same breadth of reach as I would get making television programs. So I think that kind of really drives me as well. And I love the medium, actually. I suppose I'm quite visual in the way that I think and the way that I work, and I operate within a discipline which is quite visual. Anatomy is very it is a lot about visual understanding, 3D understanding of the human body, and I love television as a medium. Television and video. So I don't really make a distinction between broadcast television and videos that you might make for online platforms, for instance. That ability to combine words with pictures, and to use real world visuals, but also to use visuals that you've created as well, as Charlotte's mentioned, using animations to share her research. It's really fun looking at different media as forms of communication. So I suppose that's what's kept me doing it. And the people, I've worked with some really fantastic people, and over time I've worked with obviously a huge range of different producers, for instance, on the television programs I've worked on. But there is some where I've worked with similar producers, or the same producers, or we might come together for a particular project. So I've made really good friends through the process as well, and we then look for projects that we can collaborate on together. So so it's about the whole process of it, the collaboration that's involved. It's about the project that you believe in. It's about engaging with that really wide audience. It's about the people that you work with, and the teamwork as well, and the visual nature of it.
Yeah. Have you got a favorite television just program that you've worked on, like even a favorite episode that you've worked on over your many years?
That's kind of tricky because they're all so different,
Sure.
And different for kind of lots of different reasons.
Anything that sticks out for being particularly sort of action packed? Or
I mean, I I really enjoyed doing my first major landmark series with the BBC, which was Incredible Human Journey, which we filmed back in 2008. And that was an extraordinary journey for me, that we traveled all around the world, filming at different archaeological sites, different paleontological sites. I also met some of the absolute leading lights in paleoanthropology and interviewed them. So, an amazing opportunity to engage with academics in that way. I felt like I was on a kind of peripatetic conference. I was traveling around talking to the people that I would love to talk to, but also working and meeting Indigenous communities around the world. So that was a really precious experience as well, meeting Evenki reindeer herders in Siberia, Vumbwasi hunter-gatherers in Namibia, and actually getting a really different view of my own culture through engaging with those other communities and their cultures. So that was a fantastic series to work on. And I also met one of my favorite people, Mags Lightbody, who I've ended up working with. She's a fantastic producer. I've ended up working with her subsequently. So that one really does stick in my mind. But there are others. Digging for Britain, which is my very long running now archaeology series on the BBC, and we're back on BBC Two later this year, I'm glad to say. That's very dear to my heart because I've been doing it for so long, but also it's about visiting sites and talking to archaeologists, and the kind of television I like doing, where I'm not presenting the research. The people who are doing the projects are presenting the research, and I'm talking to them. So again, it feels like a peripatetic conference, and I love bringing their stories to a wider audience. But also the very first series of that, which I filmed in 2010, I did with my first child, my daughter, and we set off filming when she was just 2 months old. So it was this incredible adventure, taking a tiny baby, and my husband came along with me as well, so he could look after her while I was actually on camera, and she didn't appear on camera. But yeah, that whole kind of adventure of going off as a family with this small baby and managing to do the work I love at the same time, and realizing actually that it is possible. I think so often we think, family or children, and there are some times when actually both. Family or career, family or work, and there are some times when you can get the two to work together quite nicely. Rare but precious.
Oh gosh, that sounds absolutely fantastic. What a career. Lisa, did you want to ask a question, or should we?
I slightly would like to go a little bit back to the public engagement, if nobody else have another question popping in between that, because you have talking first of all, I'm Lisa. I'm so sorry, I haven't introduced myself before. And you have talked to us so much about your way to your PhD and that, and then how you went into broadcast, but now you're also the first professor of public engagement at the University of Birmingham. Was this in between of all your career and all the different stages you went through and all the different aims you probably had, was this at some point then your personal aim to get this position and build this more or bigger at the University of Birmingham, or was it still anything that went in a natural career progress in all your time and still on probably?
That's a position that I've held at Birmingham since 2012, and I think that up until that point my career was going in a different direction. So when I was it's a very different job to the job that I had at Bristol University. So at Bristol University I ended up running anatomy on the medical course, and obviously doing my research in osteoarchaeology as well, and with a strong interest in public engagement, but that public engagement wasn't it wasn't embedded in my role at Bristol University, and actually back then there was a bit of tension about that. So for instance, I took unpaid leave to go off and film Incredible Human Journey, and there was some resistance, I think, in the university, or particularly in my department, about all sorts of different forms of public engagement. So where I was trying to get things like talks in schools off the ground and encouraging colleagues to go out and do that, and some older academics, it did tend to be older academics, were saying, oh, is this really what academics should be doing? it's not part of the core work of a university. And I just felt really strongly that it was. I thought universities should be more than just, they should be about more than just their own staff and students. They should be facing their external communities. So there were definitely some tensions there. And actually, in the end, I ended up resigning from Bristol University. So it's not as though my career has been a kind of, sort of delightful, steady progression. There have been pitfalls and there have been setbacks along the way. And in 2009, so in fact, the year after I finished my my lengthy part-time PhD, and was looking forward to getting my teeth into new research projects, but also had some actually research and media projects in mind as well. I ended up resigning from the university, and at that point, I thought I'd left academia for good. I really did, and I thought at the time, I've been fighting for public engagement to be more widely recognised. I've been trying to embed it in what academics should be doing, but I've just found personally so many barriers to that, but also perceived that the university it was talking a lot about public engagement, but it wasn't really supporting it as much as it could have been, perhaps. I mean, this is a long time ago. So I kind of thought, that's it. I don't think universities really care about public engagement. I'm going to go off and do my own thing. So as far as I was concerned at that point, I'd kind of stepped off into the world of freelancing, and I was writing books. I mean, at the time I was writing Complete Human Body, which is a big anatomy book with Dorling Kindersley, which was very fun to work on. I retained academic connections. So I was still an honorary fellow in the archaeology department at Bristol, where I did most of my research, and also at Hull York Medical School as well. So I retained those academic connections without any formal job. So I basically thought that's where my career was going at that point. And then the possibility of this post at Birmingham arose, and I wasn't sure about it because I wasn't convinced that, from my previous experience, that universities were really dedicated to the idea of public engagement. And I thought, well, it's no good to just appoint somebody to a chair in public engagement if you think you've ticked a box there that works for the whole university. That's not it. It might look good for a bit, but you've got to do something a bit more strategic. But actually, that's what Birmingham were after, and that's what I've been doing at Birmingham since then. So I'm just so delighted. I think I joined Birmingham University with an expectation of a fight because of my experience previously, and I just found that I was pushing an open door. So everything that I tried to do to, first of all, bring people together across the university to think about where we were going in terms of public engagement, to think about the barriers that existed to academics doing it, to think about all the ways that we could support academics to do it. I was just met with encouragement and support to the extent that now we have we managed to gain external funding, and we've got plenty of internal funding as well. And we now have a dedicated team working on public engagement in the university, with a director of public engagement, and we're just appointing a director of public programs. We've acquired a new building in the centre of Birmingham because our campus is out at Edgbaston, so we're not very central in the city. And we've acquired this fantastic new building quite close to the Library of Birmingham. I'm just really looking forward to that later this year, that we will have research exhibitions, we'll have all sorts of activities. It will be a place where we can engage with the city and the community in Birmingham in a completely new way. So it has been a complete delight actually at Birmingham.
Great, thank you. That sounds so much interesting. I'm based in University of Birmingham, but unfortunately, because of Corona, just have been there for a few months, so I haven't so much time to get all this. You already said a little bit about what's coming. Are there other activities you may want to share with the conference members you have achieved in the Professor of Public Engagement part?
I think the main thing in terms of my kind of role at Birmingham has been, I suppose it's been one of listening, but it's been one of trying to work out how we can support academics to do public engagement better, and to make sure that they're being recognised for doing that as well. Actually tomorrow, oh, hang on a minute, this is going to be recorded and used much later, isn't it? So I'll just go back to that. So I think that over the course of my time at Birmingham, I've been able to work with just a fantastic group of very enthusiastic people, and we've been able to not only raise the profile of public engagement internally, and I think, you know, that I'd like to think that we have contributed a bit to a kind of changing culture there, where public engagement is seen as being part of what academics should naturally be doing, and we are seeing that come to fruition now, with some very senior members of the university really kind of backing that. I mean, the Vice Chancellor David Eastwood has backed that all the way, but there are a few key people in senior positions who see the importance of public engagement and have helped to embed it actually in job structures, but also in kind of, I think, the idea of what the university is. And I would in July, we had our public engagement day, our annual day, where we celebrate achievements. So we want to celebrate best practice. We give out awards to people who've done fantastic public engagement activities over the last year. But we also have workshops, and we look widely at the kind of the landscape of public engagement nationally and internationally. And that's always a great point in the year where we sort of stop and reflect on what we're doing and look ahead. So I'm quite optimistic about the future, and I'm quite optimistic about where we're going, both in terms of Birmingham itself and as an institution, and how it feels as an institution about public engagement now. But I think, as I said to Charlotte earlier, the one thing that gives me most hope is the great enthusiasm for public engagement amongst young researchers, and that's where the change is going to come from. And we just have to make sure that universities are really supportive of people doing that.
I have, sorry, Lisa, I have seen that filtering down actually, because I did my undergraduate degree at Birmingham as well. So I've been there since 2014 now. And the curriculum I've seen in my geology department, they've started introducing museum skills studies for the current undergraduates. So that's getting them prepared with using the Lapworth to engage with children and getting them involved in the family days and things like that, which I think is really important, that they're starting to get younger undergraduate students showing them why it's important, because they don't all have the opportunities and access to museums, for example, wherever they're from. I was fortunate enough to have a local geology museum, but I mean, my town is tiny and they had one, and so I would jump at the chance of helping out. But there's so many people that don't have that opportunity. So Birmingham actually having the Lapworth is so integral to, I think, having that as part of the course now. So it's working.
It's brilliant, and I think it's lovely because it I think hopefully it kind of reminds you of why you went into the subjects that you're studying and researching to begin with, and it can help you rediscover your own passion for it. So those moments where you do get a bit downtrodden and you're doing a PhD, it's really useful to go and talk to people about what you do and find out that yes, other people are interested in it and it is worthwhile. But also it helps you, I think. I mean, what I've found about public engagement, particularly where you've got the opportunity for dialogue, is that you gain a different perspective on what you do, and that's so important because we can, we operate in our own bubbles and our own echo chambers, and I think it's very easy to be talking to people in the university who are all thinking along similar lines and have perhaps similar backgrounds. I mean, we do have people with diversity of backgrounds, but you can end up with I think quite a narrow view on your own research unless you take it out and unless you talk to other people about it. So I do think that that's really sort of useful as well. So I think there's public engagement, I think we often characterize it in terms of the value it brings to the public. Talking about the public as a great big group, and of course they're very diverse, but also there's huge value for individual researchers as well. I think it really it does help you gain those different perspectives. And the other thing is that I think it's very synergistic with all the forms of communication that we do to other groups professionally. So that if you've worked out how to talk about your subject to a group of school children, you're not going to walk into a conference and kind of hide behind a lot of jargon and convoluted sentences, you're going to be able to not dumb down, but to get to your point very quickly, and to deliver your points very quickly, and to communicate more effectively. I think it trains you in communication extremely well.
Great, thanks. Definitely, yeah, it's so interesting because just very shortly, personal thing, I studied in Berlin and we don't have much of that. So when I came first to Birmingham and, for example, had this museum at the university, I was just like, this is so great for people showing what they do. So definitely great. Does someone else want to move on with one of our questions?
Yeah. So as you've mentioned, you've got this new Digging for Britain series coming out, and I've seen on your Twitter that you've been on loads of digs recently, which I think is really cool to follow. So I was wondering if you can just give us kind of a whistle-stop tour of how a programme comes to be from initial project conception through to the filming process and everything.
Yeah, it's it can happen in quite a few different ways, actually. So in terms of where the ideas come from, so sometimes the ideas might come from researchers and development producers thinking about what might be a good subject to cover, and then starting to talk to potential contributors and starting to kind of formulate those ideas. Or you might get somebody like me who has a particular idea about a subject that I'd like to cover, and then I will talk to producers, and we'll gradually put together. I mean, it's a bit like research projects, isn't it? In that respect, we'll start to kind of formulate our ideas and think about what it is that we're particularly interested in, and gradually refine that into a pitch, and then we can take that to commissioners and hopefully get a commission. But it is rather like applying for grants, in that you can take a lot of ideas to commissioners, and only a few of them are going to come to fruition. Once you've got a program or a series commissioned, then the work starts to look at how that's going to look, how you're going to put it together. Are you going to have just one person delivering the information, or are you going to do something that's more collaborative, where you've got lots of different contributors? So there are lots of different ways to create a documentary, and you'll have seen all sorts of different documentaries that are put together in different ways. So that's about the kind of, I suppose, the style of the program, but the content as well, because really the style should flow from the best way of getting that content across. So in that way, I suppose it's like walking into the Lapworth Museum and thinking, well, I want to talk about this particular subject in paleontology. What material have I got? And how am I going to put that particular activity together? So you're kind of assembling your materials and planning it, and then after you've nailed that all down, and it has to be nailed down quite well, you're going to head off and film it. But at that point, you want to have a very good idea of what you're actually going to be doing, because essentially, I mean, I suppose the filming is delivering the activity in a way, although there's editing afterwards, and you're going to have brought on quite a big team to do that filming. So by that point, you have a very clear idea of what it is you're going to be covering each day as you're filming, and then after you've had the shoots, then obviously all of that material needs to be edited, and anybody that's done any video editing knows how long it takes. So this is a process when you're making documentary films that the editors will take weeks and months to create those television programs, and to make sure that they flow, that you've got the content that you want in there, and then finally, when it's almost all coming together as an edit, then you might have a voiceover. So we would record the voiceover as almost the last thing, and then maybe do a little bit of tweaking after that, and then you've got something which is ready to hand over to the channel, who will then put it out on television. So that's in a nutshell. Yeah. And also that's a description of the process, not from, I said, you'd get a different answer if you asked a production manager, for instance, and you'd get a different answer if you asked a director, or you might get a different answer if you asked the cameraman. But from my perspective, that's kind of how it all comes together.
Wonderful, thank you. I mean, it must make you very proud when you finally see it out after all those months of work, just to see it on the telly. Do you watch yourself or do you not watch yourself?
No, I do watch. I do, and you know, I mean, I get with these programs, you kind of have to just get used to that, because you watch yourself at various times during the making of the program anyway. So certainly, you know, when I'm scripting a voiceover, for instance, I'm definitely going to be watching that program in a kind of rough version to work out you know, what the voiceover has to be doing and what I'm going to be saying in that voiceover. So you get used to it, and I think it's really useful to watch yourself. I'm hypercritical of myself. I watch my programs going, do I have to start so many sentences with so? Do I? Can I stop doing that? So I mean, I view it as an opportunity to give myself feedback as well. So, that is useful. The other thing I love doing is when I've got a program going out, if I'm around, I really love engaging with the audience. And that's one of the things I've loved about social media is, you know, before social media came along, I would make programs and they would go out on television, and then, you know, people might email me or people might write to me, and then I can respond back to them. But that's after the event. And what social media allows you to do is have live interaction with viewers around a program. And I've used that to engage in debate, to share more information, to share particularly you know, relevant articles, journal articles that might feed into some of what we're discussing in the program, or to highlight some of the contributors that you're seeing on screen, and who are also, you know, and there's so many scientists on social media now, and it just broadens the conversation out. And it does mean that, you know, when you're sitting there watching a program and going, oh, I'd love to have asked that question, well, you can. And you know, if there's somebody like me or one of the contributors there, they can respond to you. So it does turn it into much more of a conversation, and it's fun.
That sounds great. So while you were speaking, actually, it made me think back to earlier when you were saying how you were writing research for your first TV program. How did you actually, for someone like us who are PhD students who might want to look into that, how would you approach getting into finding somebody who you can even be a researcher for on these sort of programs? Are they just advertised, or do you have to know somebody in the business, if that makes sense?
No, you don't have to. I think if you're interested in a career in television, you don't have to know somebody who's already in there. It's you know, there are very straightforward career paths into television, and they do tend to start with internships and researcher jobs. So if you're interested, I would suggest getting in touch with production companies that are making documentaries that you're interested in. And maybe looking around for, you know, opportunities, whether that's internships or being taken on as a researcher. So yeah, those jobs are out there, both, you know, obviously at the BBC, which still does some of its own production, but also increasingly at independent production companies. So, you know, definitely worth having those conversations.
Yeah, because I suppose as a PhD, you're suitably equipped to be a researcher for TV, so it makes sense as a job.
Yeah.
And I was just actually, Ellis asked earlier what your favourite programme was, so while we're on the topic of the TV shows, mine would be The Day the Dinosaurs Died. And that image of you in that room with the warehouse with all the dinosaur bones on the floor, that just sticks out. And when you were at St Arthur's Seat and you were sat right on the edge and the wind was just blowing back when you had red hair and it was just blowing out in the breeze. Yeah. I was like, very powerful imagery.
Yeah, that The Day the Dinosaurs Died was a really exciting documentary to make, actually, and it was a style of documentary that I'd been kind of petitioning the BBC to make for a long time, because I knew that there was a real kind of appetite for expedition style programs, which are exciting, but I also saw that there was a tendency to invent expeditions. And to kind of send out a bunch of presenters as though you were doing a scientific project. And for a while I'd been saying, look, there are real expeditions happening, and what we should be doing is filming those real expeditions, and you will find all those moments of discovery and, you know, the jeopardy things go wrong, things go well, and it's real, it's authentic. And so that's what I loved about that program, with the focus on that incredible project to drill a core into the peak ring of the Chicxulub impact crater. And that was a project that was happening, and we were able to go out and film that. And my co-presenter Ben Garrett went out onto the rig to watch those cores coming up and talk to all the scientists who were involved with that project. And then we were able to engage with other research expeditions and projects as well, including Ken Lacavara's amazing site in New Jersey with all those fossils, which do seem to, the timing of that does seem to relate to a devastating catastrophic event which coincides with that impact. So yes, I mean, I like it when it's real.
It was an amazing documentary. I recently rewatched it because obviously they've been replaying everything. I was like, as soon as I saw the title, like, that is going on record. So I just had to rewatch. It's so good. I love just these sort of programs, as you say, where it's real science and it's showing people the real science happens, and science isn't just behind closed doors. And that I think it's also important because science communication is showing people why they should care about science as well, and that science isn't just happening, that they have a role to play in it as well, even if they're not a researcher. Everyone can be involved in science. So I think that's why it's so important. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next, that's okay. So you've kind of touched on it like a little bit in the past couple of questions, but I'd be really interested to hear, like, how the industry of science communication has changed over the course of your career, and then perhaps, just some aspirations that you've got for how we communicate science over the next, like just 5 to 10 years, let's say.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. It's changed a lot, and in a good way. So I think that if you go back to the kind of late 20th century, there were various consultations and reports carried out into what was then called public understanding of science. And it was very much focused on this kind of deficit model, where the perception was that the public didn't know enough science, that a lot of the challenges facing us as a society were going to require scientific solutions, and that actually in a functioning democracy we needed people to be more scientifically literate, and that obviously you can achieve that to a certain degree through education, but actually you need scientific learning to carry on through people's lives because science moves on. That's the very nature of it. So I suppose the movement, if you can identify it as a movement, started out with that kind of quite paternalistic idea and that kind of deficit model, and that philosophy changed over time to becoming much more of, actually scientists also need to be listening to the public, and we should be trying to platform a dialogue in many different ways and through many different media. So that's why we now talk about public engagement with science, even though it's such a clunky term, and I often, I've just racked my brains trying to think of a more accessible term for engagement, because, if you're outside science and outside public engagement, I think people go, what is engagement? Do you need a ring? So I don't know if any of you have got any ideas about a better term for it, but
maybe public discovery.
Yeah, it's something which needs to kind of capture, and it is communication in the original meaning of the word, but unfortunately our kind of appreciation of the word communication now tends to be a one-way idea, whereas of course the word itself means coming together, and it kind of has that idea of a two-way flow bedded into it, but it's not how we tend to use it now. Anyway, so that's been a big change, but also over the time that I've been in academia, so it's about 20 years, there has been a massive change, and there's been a massive change in terms of, I think, the way that universities see public engagement, the way that they're supporting academics to do public engagement, because I don't think there's ever been a time when researchers were not keen to do public engagement. Now, not every researcher is, and that's absolutely fine, but there's always been a lot of researchers who have wanted to engage wider audiences with what they do, and we've seen the benefits of that. So I think that the benefits of that are so clear, as we've already discussed, to individual researchers, to the research itself. If you engage early, it helps you hone your research questions and also be clearer about why you're doing your research. Because I think most of us go into science hoping to make the world a better place. So it helps us to hone and focus those research questions. And it is not only good for universities, it looks good for universities, it really is good for them, because it puts them back into communities and it puts them back into culture, and stops them looking like kind of elite organizations, ivory towers on a distant hill that you can't possibly think about going and talking to anybody there, and it puts them back into our cities and back into our communities. So I think it's good in so many ways, and I think that realization has kind of come through now. And there have been various bodies that have been really driving this and encouraging it, and particularly the funders. So all of the research councils and UKRI and also big funders and big institutions like the Wellcome Trust, for instance, and Leverhulme have all helped enormously to change the culture and to change the conversations. And we are now at a point where we can see that job descriptions are changing, and this it sounds nitty-gritty and quite kind of administrative and maybe even slightly tedious, but when we have public engagement written into academic job descriptions, we know that we've got there. It's now not just something you do at the weekend, it's not just something you do in an evening. It is part of what you do as an academic. My stomach rumble. Did you hear that? Can you cut out the stomach rumble when you edit it?
So I think we had just one last question, I think, and then that's it.
Yeah, if nobody else from the others want to have any other question, we kind of thought maybe we could give all our cohort at the conference kind of a final remark from each of our keynote speakers, and you're the first one we're talking to. So would you have any kind of advice for all the PhD students that are listening to hopefully this recording, about how they will continue after their PhD, and especially if they want to go into a career into science broadcasting, so into your direction, kind of?
Yeah, I think it's such a tricky question, isn't it, when you're kind of getting towards the end of your PhD and you're very close up to your research at that point, and it's quite difficult actually to think about what life is going to bring after that, and the directions that you want to go in, because you've been so focused for so long on one particular area of research. And you may have decided that you want to continue with that research and you want to continue with an academic career, and of course there are many opportunities to do that. But you may have decided that actually you want to take all that learning that you've done about how science works into often a different direction, and it would never go to waste. I've never found that any of my scientific training has gone to waste. I'm using it all the time. And all the other skills, we talk about transferable skills that you will have picked up during your postgraduate training, and all of those will stand you in good stead as well. And if you want to go into, I suppose, public engagement as a career, think about it really widely. Think about who you want to communicate with, why you want to communicate with people, and just consider it in the widest possible terms. So don't just think, well, I definitely want to do television and that's it. Consider all the other possibilities. Would you like to become a teacher? Have you got something wonderful to give to the next generation in that way? Would you like to work with museums or other institutions that engage with the public? Would you like to focus on live communication or communication via recorded events, whether that's video, podcasting, whatever? And also, I imagine if you're interested in public engagement, you've probably done quite a bit already. So I would say play to your strengths. So you will have discovered talents in particular areas. You'll know if you're good at public speaking. You'll know if you're good at delivering information through visual media, or writing, for instance. So do play to your strengths. Having said that, you can always develop other skills and strengths as well. So, think about how you would like to be doing this in the future. But there are so many jobs out there, and as I said, don't start off with sort of one narrow idea of what public engagement could be. Look around and think about lots of different options, and you probably won't end up staying with the first one that you pick.
Great, thank you so much. Awesome. Yeah, the others, do you have anything else?
I was just going to ask a fun question. What's the most exciting thing you've ever found on a dig?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's going to be very esoteric, I'm afraid. So I haven't made any amazing groundbreaking discoveries of a new hominin fossil species, or a dead king in a car park. I can't claim to any kind of headline grabbing discoveries like that. But the thing which fascinated me most was a very curious object. And if I can cheat, I didn't find it actually on the dig. I found it later, because when I excavate human bones, I quite often take those back to my lab and then painstakingly clean up those bones in the lab. So, I'll excavate them carefully on site. But when I package them up, they've still got some mud, particularly skulls will still be full of mud. So I will wait till I get back to my lab to clean those up more carefully. And there was one particular skull from a site that I'd excavated as part of a time team program, actually in Hampshire, which had a hole in the vault of the cranium, which was curious to begin with, because when I looked at that, sometimes we get people making holes in skulls in the past. It's called trepanation. And that can be done by scraping the outside of the skull or drilling it and then sawing. And we think that certainly in antiquity, when we see that it might be associated with probably trying to relieve very bad headaches, and maybe around letting bad spirits out of somebody's head. We don't really know what's going on, but it happened. It did happen. This didn't seem to be trepanation. It didn't seem to be something that was carried out by people. It looked natural. And also, interestingly, the edges of the hole looked as though whatever had caused it had been applying pressure from the inside and not the outside. And then when I took all the remaining soil out of that skull cavity, I found this object which was about 2 centimeters in length, and it looked like a small chalky pebble, and it was very light. And I was very bemused by this. I had a kind of inkling of an idea of what it might be, because I had done some medicine where I'd seen something similar in Africa, in fact. And so I got in touch with colleagues, with medical colleagues, and asked them what they thought. And what we are pretty sure this strange pebble-like object was a calcified hydatid cyst. So this is a horrendous thing to have. It's basically an encysted tapeworm that has found its way into the brain. And so tapeworms have this. Well, the pork tapeworm has this complicated life history where it's only meant to live in the guts of humans, but occasionally the larvae will get out and burrow through the intestinal wall and go and form cysts in muscle, but also sometimes in brains as well. So it was utterly fascinating and quite a gruesome find. But a hydatid cyst inside the skull of an Anglo-Saxon man from Hampshire.
Wow, that is a good fun fact. That is. I'm very glad I asked that question. Just shows you learn something new every day. Does anybody else have any questions?
I think we're probably okay. So I'll probably just stop the recording now, and then we can just have a little chat afterwards or whatever. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. I think I know how to do it. So yeah.